It's only up from here.
Welcome to The Verbal Process, a collection of conversations between two individuals processing life and faith so as to engage knowledge for the sinner, reality for the saint, and the cultivation of truth for all.
I just saw my therapist. She talked about feelings. She said that I'm scared of it. I made a habit of
Diabetes.
Get that bitch.
Have you lost your mind?
Have you lost your freaking mind, man?
Have you lost your mind?
RC Sproul.
Jeez. I don't even know what I'm talking about anymore. Have you lost your mind?
Have you lost your mind?
Goodness. Thank you, RC.
That is like such a perfect segue.
It is. Well, last week we were talking about losing our minds and trying to find them and trying to understand thought. And
Hey, who can understand thought?
right? We're verbally processing through it. What do you what do you think about last week in the conversation and just kind of recapping it?
Yeah, I thought it was super important. It was good that we kind of defined thought, but then we also defined thinking, and that is super important, as it pertains to our not only perception of reality, but discovery of reality, because thinking is a processing of something, kind of like we're doing verbally. What we're doing verbally is we're expounding a little more on what's going on here as we cognitively have the interface of what's before us, what's going on in our comprehension of things and development, as we go through about life, and then our inner kind of existential aspect of our inner self and wrestling with those things as well. So that's all of those things we process are like variables, because we process in each of those things, and yet we're overall simultaneously processing.
Yeah.
So we're kind of in that pursuit of discovering and finding our mind, I guess. Like,
yeah, and you either do it or you don't, right? Like if we break it down into layman's terms, it's everybody's thinking, everybody has some form of intellect, everybody has some comprehension and understanding of they are a person, we live in the world, and so at the end of the line, right, we ended up coming to the importance of thought, the importance of thinking is to understand our why, right? It's what you said. And you either it's when we were talking about it earlier, you brought up that the 20s aren't the golden years, but it's the 30s and 40s that are the golden years, because the 20s is when we are working through these questions, and it's a dark time in a person's life, because life kind of hits you, reality kind of starts to set in of like the world isn't just here to serve me, and it's not just a fantasy land, and my parents aren't gonna just take care of me or whatever. And a lot of the questions of the existential questions of life start to hit.
right.
And you either go one of two ways we started talking about, right? And it's you either go towards Christ, you find God, and well, ultimately he reveals himself to you, and he is the ultimate. So you either go towards God, have a relationship with him, and that is one path or one rut you go, or the other rut is away from him, and you just pursue the world, the lusts of the world, the lust of the flesh, the pride of life, and ultimately we know that sin brings death and destruction, and so apart from Christ, our end is just death. It's literally the two paths are basically life and death, and that's pretty much what it is. So we came last week to the place of why it's important, and so now, I mean, to kind of go into that a little more, it's important because it's literally the difference between life and death. Like, why is knowing the truth important, right? Like, and how can we know the truth? Why is knowing the truth important? And how can we know the truth? Why is thinking important? And how can we grow in thinking and understanding the truth?
Yeah, exactly. And I think you had such a good kind of synoptic statement last time. You don't know truth until until you know who God is. And I kind of posited the question for us to think about. You don't know truth until you define God. Until you define, and I want to kind of I guess parcel out what we mean by God. In the Christian, the Christian God is God has revealed himself to us. through the work and person of Jesus Christ and through the scriptures over the course of redemptive history. And through the Holy Spirit, we have illumination and understanding of who God is and seeking to conform and devote ourselves in the same way that Christ did to the will of the Father. So, and then obviously you get into nuanced conversations about all those different aspects. Is it true? Is it historical? All of those things. But I think too, I want to simply put out and posit that you define God either as ultimate reality or actualized full potential, kind of the doctrine of simplicity that God simply is. And then in our finiteness, we're trying to parcel out meanings as we go along in the process of that. Or you have the other end of the spectrum where your limitation and your maximized capacity for comprehension is what lies within you. And so I think, your limitation is, well, I can only cognitively process what's in my mind. So therefore I think, therefore I am, kind of a Descartes scenario. So you kind of have both ends of the spectrum here. And I want to define that because the only thing that sets us apart as believers in our understanding of things is Christ, right? Because in a practical sense, getting to our why, when defining our terms, if you only limit it to yourself, you could on paper apply some of the same things as far as existence, but the reason that you're going to be doing those things is different. So whereas you got, an example that I've heard used before, you have Navy SEALs, one's a Christian and one's not. The only difference is Christ. Both are dedicated to country. Both are dedicated to even a higher moral cause than themselves for sacrifice. But one is doing it on behalf of who Christ is and what he's done. And the other is doing it because that's their purpose in life. That's their endeavor, is to serve and to. So again, I'm not saying that there can't be practically synonymous things, but in the objective sense and kind of defining your terms, if you will. That's what we're getting into, I feel like, more as we continue this conversation. We're defining our terms as we come to grasp and come to touch the objective.
Yeah.
That which is outside of us.
And since God is, right, defining God is important because God is either the God of the Bible, because he is the only God who has made the truth claim of being the way, the truth, the life, the one and only, the living, that there are no other gods other than him, right? So God is either the Judeo-Christian God because he has made the objective truth statements that no other religion has. You, for the most part, in other religions, you just have many gods, and at that point you might as well not even be in that religion, because you have no true objectivity. You have a God for every other thing. And so I can't even imagine trying to dive into understanding like Buddhism or some of the Eastern religions that have so many different gods, because I'm sure there's contradictions, but between what the gods believe. But the one true living God, Yahweh, does not contradict himself, and he is the truth. And so in defining God, you either have the Judeo-Christian God, the God of the universe, the creator of heaven and earth, or you have pretty much yourself. We basically just make our own gods, and we make ourselves our gods. Like you're saying, I can only really understand insofar as I think, therefore I am. And if that is your ultimate reality, then that also means that your end is death, because we're mortal. And so it's only with God, with Yahweh, through Jesus Christ and can there be life. And not only life here, I think this life is very empty, and insofar as our earthly existence is very empty apart from Christ. And so he brings us life, in that he gives us joy and peace and love while we're here on earth. But then the most important aspect of that life is the true life, the eternal life, the spiritual life. That means that we only die once, whereas the person that makes themselves their God, they die 2 deaths, and they die physical and spiritual death. They, their end is the grave. So this is why, right? I mean, this is why truth is important, right? I mean, I think this is ultimately why we even care to talk about it, because it is a matter, it's funny, but something as simple as thinking, something as simple as processing through thought in life can literally be the difference between life and death, both on the earth and how your life is lived out on the earth. But more importantly, thinking and processing is important because it's the difference between eternal life and death. And so then we get to, well, how do we know the truth? Like, how do we know what the truth is? We know why the truth is important, but how do we know what the truth is?
And I think it's, and it kind of gets into the question of, well, not only how but why. We were talking about finding our why holistically as people, and then individual, but also why do we have to define what truth is? Why do we have to segment it to one thing or to an absolute? And we kind of got into that a little bit last time, because I remember mentioning the law of non-contradiction. If your life is purposeless, that is your end in your mind. You've arrived in that sense, because there's no purpose in your mind, and that in and of itself is an objective statement. And I think with that, what we're trying to say is not to get too far ahead of ourselves, the eternal significance of it, but it's important to define truth, because again, going back to what I was saying, you have this point of objectivity, but you also have your reference point to reality. And if you don't define your terms, you will do the same thing over and over again, which is the height of idiocy. And not, and I'm talking like in an actual like medical, psychological sense. Like, the height of idiocy is for us to keep doing the same thing each and every day over and over again, but not know why we're doing it. Not trying to come to grips with the existential angst. And you even mentioning the 20s, kind of like we were talking about beforehand, which I think is so important to highlight, is we're still in the process as 20-year-olds particularly, but then as people overall, no matter your age, you're still coming to grips each and every day with the significance of your existence and the significance of reality itself. And so the reason you need to know truth is because you have to know, how then do I conform myself to what reality actually is meant for, to what my potential actually is for. Like we mentioned last time, the Aristotelian telos, for example, the chair is made to sit. Well, what is man made for? And that can get very nuanced and perplexing. But the point being that you need to know the truth, so that even in the small microcosms of life and your individual decisions, you're seeking to not only set yourself up for success, but the flourishment and the embettering of not only the human race, but why are you doing that? What value, what purpose do you have for that? And then now you're segmenting this framework so that your life is led by that why. And I think that's what's missing in our society today, is especially, with guys our age and people our age, is just trying to find, like, not just find a cause worth dying for, but find the cause. And what is the thing that will propel us and compel us to live not only our greatest life, but a life of wisdom and maturity.
Yeah.
So we
Well,
are to help people. And
it's
yeah,
funny too, because nihilism is so easy. Not having purpose is so easy.
yeah,
Just settling for less is easy. It's doesn't take any work, and um, I can just, if this life is it, um, then let's live like there's no tomorrow. If this life is just it, then there's no consequences for my actions. It's just like I can just do whatever. I can do whatever makes me feel good, and I don't really have to process through a greater purpose. And that kind of goes back to what we were talking about with the two paths. In the 20s, we come to a fork in the road, which propels us into the 30s and 40s. You either have golden years in your 30s and 40s, where there's people who, apart from Christ, I would say, in maybe not in the grand scheme of things, not in light of eternity, don't live a golden, don't live in the golden years.
Yeah.
So insofar as, as it counts for earthly standards, and so far as like monetarily, they have chosen it, most likely when they were in their 20s, to take the path which is more difficult and face life and overcome its obstacles. But again, in the grand scheme of things, if they haven't come to know the truth, like the ultimate truth, then the golden years are still the peak of their life. Like, they don't have an ultimate after death. And so even their end, ironically enough, is it is, in a sense, it's nihilistic, because you can't claim that, life has purpose and meaning if it doesn't have an ultimate purpose and meaning, because we die. Yeah. So it's like you either think that this life has, you ultimately either believe this life has no purpose, and that after this life and after death is just nothing. So it's literally one of two ways. You either believe that this life has no purpose, but you act like it does, and you try to serve some greater cause, and it's more or less you're lying to yourself about, the ultimate truth and the ultimate reality, which is, the purpose of this life is to make the world a better place, and the purpose of this life is to make other people happy, and the purpose of this life is, okay, well, even if that's what you claim is the purpose of life, there's still a nihilism behind it, because death is your end and death is everybody's end. So you have no ultimate meaning. You have no ultimate purpose. So I think it's dangerous when we get caught up in living our best life now, because that is nihilism. Your best life isn't now. That is a lie. You're living a lie and trying to pass it off as the truth.
Yeah, well, I think it kind of, again, it's twofold as well, because as the Christian, we actually have the understanding in the sense of what is to come, and that propels us to live as we ought to now. But it actually gives you even more of a framework to enjoy the now. And what I mean by that is not it. This isn't the ends to, or this isn't the means to the end. This life, because just like Paul said, if we only have hope and joy in Christ in this life, we're the most to be pitiable. Like, if there's no resurrection from the dead or anything like that, or no, not even just hope, but reality that we will be glorified as believers and reunited with our Maker, then yeah, like, why are we not taking inventory and enjoying life as if it is the end? But we enjoy life because we recognize it's been given, and we enjoy life because, like, and I've been talking with you about this and some other friends, just the simplicity of waking up, and yeah, my mind's probably already going, the subconscious is processing still and all of those things, but yet each day I have to wake up, and when I wake up and I begin processing, what am I setting my mind and my vantage to? And as I go along, am I able to actually be grateful and to take time to treasure and cherish each moment as it's given, whether suffering or flourishing? And I think because life is a grace, and there's a commonality in that grace to both those who are Christ's and those who are not. So I think it's twofold. And what we're not saying is that you can't enjoy life, but there's all the more reason to, because of the life to come.
I don't think you can enjoy life apart from Christ. Like, the reason why the Christian can have, I mean, by the power of the Spirit, obviously, the reason why the Christian can have joy, the reason why the Christian can have peace, is because this life is just an extension of eternity, right? Like, our physical existence is just a piece to our ultimate existence in eternity. So we live joyfully knowing that there's more to come, like you're saying. But for the person that doesn't have that hope, again, you can fill your life with as much, I'm just going to call it false truth and false hope as you want, and as much distraction as you want. But your ultimate underlying belief is still nihilism, and therefore your life is drab. And I mean, if you don't have a purpose beyond this life, then everything you do will be from that place, whether you think about it or not, whether you believe, whether you would call yourself a nihilist or not, right? You are still operating from that place because you know in the back of your mind that you don't believe there's purpose beyond this life. And if that's the case, then I'm going to do whatever makes me feel good now, and I'm going to have no reservations about what I say and what I do. And it's really not going to be about, being happy. It's going to be about just doing whatever feels good. Insofar as I don't think anybody's really happy when, they, for example, I don't know, chase a vice, for example. You're not really happy when you're doing that. You're just chasing it because you're chasing a feeling, you're chasing an experience. And you're also doing that in light of the fact that, well, life is meaningless. It doesn't even matter. Doesn't matter if I get drunk. It doesn't matter if I watch porn. It doesn't matter if I get high. It doesn't matter if I go start a fight. It doesn't matter if I fill in the blank. And you're chasing it because you have no greater goal. You have no greater cause in mind. And so as a Christian, because we have the greater goal, the greater cause, I think, to your point, it propels us to live this life to the glory of God. And in light of that, we don't have to just pursue pleasure, but we can pursue righteousness. We can pursue what is good and true and honest. Because if you're pursuing honesty and you're pursuing truth and you're pursuing what's right, with no ultimate purpose beyond this life, then it's probably self-serving, and it's probably pointed back to yourself. But
Yeah. Well, and I think what are all those things a part of, right? They're all consequences of the lack of fullness of potential, right? We wake up every morning and we think there is this and this potential for what this day could be. And if I envision my perfect day, what would I do? And you have to wrestle with those things in a practical sense and an everyday sense. But for the Christian, it's the scripture gives us insight to what those things are, to the they're not just disciplines, they're the cultivation of habitual patterns that aid our understanding of why Christ and why God, because what it is, they're the paths to, again, cultivating a deeper understanding so that we might outwardly display more of the potential. And that's the beauty of it. I think for the unbeliever, I think they could come to grips with that there's something outside of themselves that they should do, right? And yeah, will it be limited to this point of existence, and this conscious, awareness that we call life? I would say yes, because in their mind it stops there. So, but nevertheless, that drive to do the most of actualizing my potential while I'm still here, I think, is something that seems to be innate within people. Some people it takes I forget what the term exactly is. It takes the bottoming out of life to come to grips in reality with that. But I think for the believer, it's because God has given us purpose. It's because God has shown us that there is an absence. That's why there's sinfulness. That's why there is hatred. That is why there is death.
In a sense, we kind of get like told what rock bottom is before we hit it. Like it's possible to know what rock bottom is and to understand it without fully arriving there. And ultimately, I think we do hit rock bottom in a sense of when we come face to face with our sin, that kind of is rock bottom. When we understand our sinfulness, that kind of is rock bottom. And what the gospel is, right, is that we are wickedly sinful, depraved, and hopeless. So that reality, like that truth of you human being are wickedly sinful and completely hopeless apart from Christ. That's like bang, like that reality is rock bottom. You know what I mean? And there's nowhere to go from there but up. Like it's literally it, you know?
Well, and it's the reality of redemption within the heart of the person too. You read passages like Ephesians 5 and all these things, and I forget the exact author or theologian who posited this, but all he said that all that a man is what he is on his face before God. And if we think in terms of what we're talking about conceptually right now with potential and absence, God is fully actualized, and so in his holiness and in his purity of essence and being, when we're faced with that, we see all of our absences are made aware, where this isn't fully actualized or this isn't. And as far as it goes for humanity and our sinfulness in a moral sense, when we look at God, there it's completely absent. Like we're not at the we're not completely, you know. So I don't want to say we're at the worst that we could be, but our capacity to achieve potential is not there. We don't have that unless God intervenes as it pertains to the things of God, which is what the scripture would reveal and speak of.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I think it's so healthy to help our audience understand too, like the importance of the gospel and what we're saying is true in those things. But what we're also saying as well is like not to diminish the gospel in any sense. But again, on paper, we could be doing the same things. On paper, we could be trying to lead a life that is beyond ourselves, but it only comes to a head if it's just for this life. And I'm not even trying to diminish the fact that we should live beyond ourselves. I think we should. You know, if even if I wasn't a Christian, I still think that to some degree, I would still desire to be a better man. I would still desire to do something. But again, I could play semantics with what if all day. Nevertheless, what has happened is that I am a Christian because of the work of Christ upon my heart. And therefore, I should seek to maximize my potential
Yeah.
to the fullness of who I am with soul, mind, strength, body, all of those things, because they have been turned to Christ. I am bound to righteousness. And this really goes into, you know, what I kind of wanted to touch on earlier, this pull between flesh and spirit that we see in Galatians 5, and the outworking of those things. The fruits are the manifestations of each of those things, right? So with the flesh, people think, oh, I should hate the body. You know, there have been Puritans and people like that. I should hate this existence. I should hate everything. Whereas, no, but because of the Spirit, you are to, in this, posit the reality of what Christ did. The Word became flesh. God's will was manifested complete so that it might be reproduced within us as his people. And so the Spirit is the one who capacitates us to do those things. Love, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. All of these things are manifestations of the potential of who we're called to be. But our nature innately, you know, simultaneously is going on with that. Our nature is sin, debauchery, idolatry, sexual immorality, and
Selfish.
these things. Yeah, but all of them too, like you just going back to the practical side of it, all of those things have such overwhelming consequence that affect all the people around us.
Yeah.
And I think it's important to highlight that, you know, the path of wisdom into maturity is not discipline for discipline's sake, but self-control, so that the cultivation of your appetites not only glorifies God, but aids, you know, yourself as you're going along and the people you interact with. Each situation is redeemable now, right? God is going to use his church to convey redemption.
Yeah.
Such a beautiful part, because that's us coming to grips with the practical side, the pursuit of our purpose and our why with the guardrails of truth because of who God is and who Christ has made us to be, is so that the actualization of our potential is to manifest the will of God.
Yeah.
Like,
and isn't that what it says? I think, is it Ecclesiastes where he says man's chief end is it to know God?
Yeah, he says like he put eternity in the hearts of men, but like the end of it is fear God and do what he commands.
Yeah.
You know, because otherwise I tried everything. I chased even not only debauchery, not only hedonism, but I chased madness and folly. You know, I tried to see what end, and it wasn't even so much like it didn't satisfy. Like, that's only a consequence of it. The point was, there's no purpose. All there is this life, and that's it. If there's not the fearing of God and the following of commandments, then there's not the actualized of potential. There's only absence.
Yeah. So why is truth important? Why is truth important? And have we deconstructed our understanding of reality and life as to come to a greater understanding of what truth is? Why is truth important, and how do you know truth?
Thank you so much for tuning into The Verbal Process. We hope that you were inspired and encouraged by the dialogue that you just heard. Please tune in on a weekly consistency for updated dialogues and content. You can find us on social media, on YouTube, or any of the major podcast platforms. And we hope that in all of your discovery, you process well.
Maybe I can find it if I try to stop looking in other places to cover traces of other cages. I'm way, way weaker than I was the other day, but nobody knew I was above the wave. Peter, who drowned who?